Welcome to Future Tradesman. I'm your host, Jared Glasgow, and I'll be joined shortly by my co-host, Dave Griffith. And on episode 2, we are going to be talking about SaaS fatigue. All right, Dave, well, I guess we'll start this as we normally be calling in from today.
So I am calling in from Southeast Idaho, kind of hunkering down during this COVID-19 crisis. We had thought about doing it in the desert, and we had spent some time in the desert. And if you guys are watching on video, this is the north rim of the Grand Canyon, and that above my head that I'm pointing to is snow. There's actually also snow in
Nice.
Idaho in the front yard at 5,500 feet. And April 21st. So Southeast Idaho is where we're going to call home for the short term. And I see that you're calling in next to a picture of a cow, Jared.
Yeah, that's right. So I'm in my quarantine bunker, right down the hill from our place where we stay in my grandmother's basement. So yeah, this is my spot for the quarantine. So I know it's been a bit more of a harrowing couple of weeks for you than it has been for me with all that's going on. But yeah, so glad to be back on the show. Hope everybody out there is staying safe and healthy. Yeah, so let's jump right into it. So on today's show, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics. Something I've been talking about for the past like 10 years. I don't know, whatever. But me and Dave lovingly call this SaaS fatigue. So the general idea is, over the past 5 years, we've kind of seen on both sides that people is getting tired of recurring subscriptions and SaaS products and kind of paying that monthly fee. So with all that's going on today, and we know that a lot of you guys in your personal life or in your business, you might be considering kind of, what are the things in your budget right now that you might could live without? And one of the first things that kind of comes to mind are these SaaS products that we pay for on a recurring basis. So we're going to kind of talk through this whole thing today, but I think it's kind of good to kind of set the stage a little bit. So Dave, why don't you kind of give us a little bit of background of like, how did we get to this position we're in right now where we feel like SaaS is kind of eating the world?
Yeah, I think it is one of those things that it happened, and most of us weren't necessarily aware that it happened, right? So 10 years ago, almost everyone, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, we had the dot-com bubble. That's when everyone was going into software. Software had eaten the world. Software needed to find a better way in order to continue to make money so that they could continue to pay developers. And so we went to this SaaS, so this software as a service. And now it feels like everything is dinging us with software as a service. It's just one after the other after the other. And Jared and I actually sat down. We had talked about the concept of SaaS fatigue back in December of 2019. And when we posted that video, we got some like really interesting responses. And there were a lot of people who were not necessarily sure because like their business was a SaaS-based business. And so there were a lot of people who weren't necessarily sure that like SaaS had eaten the world or that SaaS was necessarily a bad thing. But we sit down and we talk to customers, especially large enterprise customers. And man, if you're paying $10, $20, $50 per seat per user every month, and you've got 500, 600, 700 users, it gets really expensive extremely quickly. And so that large tech concept of building this monthly reoccurring revenue, which is what all of the venture capitalists were looking at in order to invest hundreds of millions or billions of dollars, like everyone wanted to look at that. They wanted your churn, so your user base to turn over smaller and smaller. And as I've talked about in the past, this is just one of those inflection points where the money just isn't continuing to free flow. People are starting to look at their expenses. I know I have strongly looked at every subscription that has come up in the past 6 or 8 weeks. And honestly, most of my annual subscriptions have been coming up in the last 6 or 8 weeks. So strongly looking at, hey, do I actually get the value out of this? And honestly, most of them are yes, because I'm not involved in a ton of subscriptions, but even like subscription boxes and gym memberships, that is basically the same sort of recurring revenue that this SaaS, this as a service platform And and Jared, I think that you are a great person to talk about why they're so appealing, because the concept behind Beloved Robot and what you've been doing for the last decade is building software that people can actually purchase, so that you're not trying to charge them the 10, 20, $50 per user every month. So can you tell us a little bit about why SaaS is so appealing to so many companies?
Yeah, so I think I think when you're evaluating and you're looking to solve a problem with software, you sort of make this like hit list of, these are the items that it has to sort of solve. Here are like a few nice to haves, and here are things that would just be like icing on the cake. So depending on what that problem is, you'll sort of go through as a decision maker and run down that list. And some of these problems can be pretty complex, right? When it comes to things like time tracking or project management, get into like these like advanced software systems does, whether it's CAD or all this kind of stuff. There can be some very heavy lifting stuff that goes on there. So the complicated, and when you go looking at the options, especially with the SaaS solution, there's sort of this low entry point, right? So it's generally, most of them don't have an implementation fee. It's just sort of like, hey, just get on the recurring train, and the cost is pretty low up front. And so you're seeing a ton of value up front for what you're paying. I'm paying $300 this month and I get this massive software. And so, yeah, so that's sort of how they get you into the coffer and get you kind of paying them. But as time goes on and you start sort of using that tool in your day-to-day life, that's when you start sort of seeing the sort of pitfalls. The value gets less appealing over time when you look at, oh, well, actually, I've paid $30,000 for this tool over the past 2 years, and it's really not solving our problems well. Mm-hmm. So I think there's sort of this arc that you go through where it's like up front you see a ton of value for your dollars, but then over time that sort of lifetime value starts to flatten out and maybe even go into the negative, And there's a lot of different ways that this can manifest itself. It could be that it becomes sort of like a back office nightmare where you have these separate systems that don't really talk together well, don't work together well. So it becomes sort of a data management issue. We often call those data silos, where you look at your business and you have all your accounting information in one system. You have all your project management information in another system. You have all your time in another system. You do payroll and ADP. And so you have all these different data silos. And then what lives in between all those and brings them together is me and you, as people, And so, what started off as this really low entry point, high value offering over time kind of turns into a real headache, and like sort of going back to like what you were saying earlier, like I think like from the software provider standpoint, the only metric that they use to sort of value their business is like how many people do they have paying these monthly subscriptions. So it became, instead of a metric of how well are we serving our customers, how well are we meeting their needs, all these other things, it all just became this single sort of venture capital driven metric of, we've got this many customers and our churn rate is really low, so people aren't leaving. So we're like winning the day. So I think a lot of this sort of leads to the feeling as a customer, as a company who's spending 10 to 20 to 30 to sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for these tools, that you're just like a cog in the wheel. They don't really care about you. You can't talk to a human being. You can't pick up the phone and call them if something comes up. They're not going to help you implement it with their existing system. And so it kind of leaves you with this bad taste.
Yeah, no.
So yeah, so if you have anything to add there, I feel like I kind of rambled on for a while.
No, I think you made some really good points. And I'd actually like to give a couple of examples. So I'm going to go and pick on Microsoft's Office 365. For anyone that doesn't know, I'm not a Microsoft fan. I'm specifically calling in on a MacBook Pro because Microsoft has done me dirty on some licenses in the past. But I think Office 365 is a fantastic example of a SaaS product that is done correctly. Most people that I know in business who are Microsoft users love Office 365 because for the $5 or $25 a month per person, They can make sure that all of their people have it. It's infinitely scalable. So if you add an employee, you can spend the extra few dollars every month. You can give them the latest, greatest software suite. It doesn't matter if they're Mac users, if they're PC users, you can literally give them everything that they possibly would need license-wise for that. And if you look at it, it's about the cost of upgrading every year or every couple of years, as most people in business would, if you need the latest and greatest. And it offers a lot of business intelligence tools like Power BI, which is a great data analytics tool that everyone that I know who uses it absolutely loves it. So I think that Microsoft, I will give them props. I think that is a SaaS product done correctly, especially on the enterprise level, because it's infinitely scalable. On the flip side, I feel like Slack, which is a tool that we use at Beloved Robot, and I've used probably every day for the last 4+ years, is one of those tools that really makes me wonder, do I actually get the value of Slack for the $10 or $15 per user every month, above the free tier? Yes, we get access to a bunch of messages, but as Jared was talking about, it's literally just a data silo. So the question is, okay, did we email it? Did we text it? Did we Slack it? Where is this information? How do I find it? Slack is literally just a data silo. If information goes in there, it is not like a good knowledge base. And if there was a way to push everything into Slack, like a SharePoint, and turn it into a knowledge base, like, I think that would become infinitely better. But at $10 per user every month, that gets extremely expensive, especially if you can compare it to like a Microsoft Teams or something along those that's included in an overall suite, or even like a Discord server, which I know lots of people are using. Is it an enterprise level solution? I don't necessarily know, but I think it's one of those that people are seriously considering, hey, do I get the value out of something like Slack?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, I think you made a great point there of like, we're definitely not like making the case that SaaS is bad across the board. Like, I think your example of Office 365 is a perfect example of the world we lived in before, where it was like you would have to buy a license, and then most companies wouldn't buy new licenses for like a decade. So you're stuck on like Office 98, and it's not
Love Office
compatible with
98.
new, you're emailing documents around and all this.
The doc
So,
and the Doc X crisis that we lived through like
oh my gosh,
8 or 9 years
wow,
ago, maybe
it's
longer than
crazy.
that. I think we just aged ourselves in that reference, Jared.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
No, but
um,
definitely. And I think that the question becomes, there's good SaaS, there's bad SaaS, there's certainly SaaS that we're feeling the fatigue of and we don't necessarily find the value of. Jared, can you walk us through like, how should a VP of IT or a director of IT or a C-level person evaluate a SaaS product to figure out if they get the value out of it in the near and the long term?
yeah, so I think like just sort of, I think this is why this is sort of a good time to kind of discuss this topic, because I think it's right now it's a great opportunity to kind of look at the tools that you're paying for, what you're paying for them, and kind of reassess. And then I think you can kind of use the same sort of tactics and methodology when it comes to purchasing new software. So I think the first place to start is just like, let's look at like, what are you spending today on the tools that you have? So break out your spreadsheet, start knocking them in there, put in there how much you've spent over the past 2 years on these tools, what you're spending every month or every year. And then sort of like, I think that as a first step kind of brings to light and reminds you of where your dollars and cents are going and what the value that brings. And then from there, I think you can start looking at, what sort of functionality does this tool bring, and can it be easily duplicated or moved to a different system for maybe a better value, So whether it's replacing it with a cheaper option, or maybe as part of your one of your other software suites, maybe it's your ERP system, or like Dave said, stuff like Office 365 offers these insane sets of tools that we often don't realize that we have access to. So is there a way to leverage the tools that we're married to permanently to sort of eliminate some of these options? If you're using a standalone time tracking app, maybe there's a tool that you can use that's cheaper or better. When it comes to managing documents and stuff, if you're paying for some other tool, document management system. Maybe you can leverage a tool that you already have at your exposure. So I think that's sort of a great place to start, just sort of forcing yourself and your team to reassess all these items and say, okay, out of software B, C, and D, are we really getting the value that we need out of these, or is it just costing us a lot of money and more headache on the back end? So I think that's sort of a good place to start when it comes to looking at that. And when you're looking at buying new software tools, I think sort of going through that same process I talked about earlier, just like evaluating the value and try to think of it as a 2 to 3 year engagement and weigh the cost that way. So it's easy to look at the first few months and say, okay, I'm going to be spending $300 a month. Mm-hmm. But if you're making that purchasing decision, knowing that I'm going to be stuck with this for 3 or 4 years, mm-hmm. weigh the cost there. How much is this going to cost me over the next 4 years? Because when it comes to rolling out a new software within your organization, that's a lot of work, and mm-hmm. it's not something you can easily unwind, right? So whether you're implementing a new tool or changing out an existing tool, there's some overhead there that you have to consider also. So keep that in mind also as you kind of go through this process.
No, definitely. And I think that kind of dovetails into how people can move on. How can you move on from a SaaS solution? And I think it very much goes into the value question that you're asking. And it's if I'm spending $10 per user every month and I've got, 30 employees and it costs me $300 a month, it's not all that expensive. But if I'm paying $50 per user every month and I've got 700 employees, then suddenly it becomes a much more expensive question. And it becomes the question of, hey, if I'm spending $70,000 to $100,000 over the course of this year for this software suite, and next year, best case scenario, I get lucky and I get to spend the same $70,000 or $100,000 in 2021 as I did in the previous year, then it's looking, hey, I've got, $300,000 plus over the next 3 years. Can I buy a solution that's actually, exactly what I need, that integrates with my current solutions, that's not causing me more work and double or triple or quadruplicate levels of input into my CRM, into my ERP, into my accounting software, into this weird software that is another data silo, as we talked about. And most of the time, if you're spending that amount of money, you're looking to spend that amount of money, you can certainly find a solution that is going to be less expensive and is going to consume less amount of time.
I think that sort of the size of the organization there, that discussion really kind of comes into play a lot. Maybe something that I didn't fully flesh out earlier. So I'm glad you brought that up. It's like if you're making a purchasing decision for a team of 20 guys, that's very different than a team of 2,000, right? Yes. And so the scale there really kind of changes things up a good bit, Mm-hmm. So I think that really plays in heavily into kind of how you make these decisions.
Oh, definitely. And, for some organizations, if you've got a Google Sheets expert and that guy can put together the Google Sheets for a 20-person team, that's absolutely fantastic. The odds of a Google Sheets scaling infinitely to 2,000 or 20,000 or 100,000 employees it is slim to none, because it wasn't a piece of software designed to do that. And when you get to the level of needing software that works on an infinitely larger scale, you're not going to be able to do it for $5 or $10 per user every month. It's just that doesn't exist in the rest of the world.
Yeah. So like talk us through a little bit, like, if you're wanting to move away from this sort of recurring on the hook for this from the time being, like what are your options as a decision maker, as a CIO or a CTO or a CEO for sort of solving this problem with technology, mm-hmm. but not being on the hook from now until forever to maintain it?
Yeah, I mean, if you've looked at the numbers and you've decided that you can afford, a 5 to 6 figure piece of software, then it becomes the question of build versus buy. And most of the time, if you are paying for this as a SaaS solution in the past, you probably don't have the people internally that are going to build it for you, or you don't want to devote their time in order to do that. So if you're looking to buy a solution, you want to look for someone that has experience developing the sort of solutions in the enterprise space, in the manufacturing space, someone that has knowledge of your specific vertical, because that's important. I talked to lots of other integrators, lots of other developers. If you haven't spent time in the manufacturing space, you don't realize that time tracking is exactly the same in 2020 as it was in 1970. In fact, it may be slightly worse because we've got now 50-year-old time punch cards, machines that everyone lines up for, as opposed to into 1970, we had brand new time card punch machines. And so it's one of those things of, you need to go and find someone who has experience in the vertical, who has experience solving either the same type of problem that you've done or a similar type of problem that you have done in the past, and go and have a conversation with them. In fact, you may want to have a couple of conversations with people who have solved problems like you have before. If you know other people in the same industry, have conversations with them to see if they can recommend someone that has solved this problem in the past.
Yeah, and it's a sort of undertaking that a decade ago was sort of out of the picture for most folks, just like building your own software or sort of designing your own system like this. But really the things that have changed over the past decade, and when it comes from hosting a server in the cloud to building these integrations, it's really light years ahead of where it used to be. And even systems that are somewhat considered, especially in this setting where you have sort of like you're probably going to have some sort of main ERP system that kind of runs your business. We've seen over the past 5 years, like these ERP systems implement really advanced APIs and integration points like that. So it's just made all that sort of software workflow so much easier to build and maintain over the long haul. So if you can, have a bigger investment up front, get a lot of value, then over time, the lifetime value of a tool like that could be extremely high, and really you could really see a big return on that investment.
No, completely. And I think that brings up a couple of good points. One, make sure that when you're doing something like this, you can integrate it, or you do integrate it with as many systems as possible, so that you don't have to have that double, triple, quadruplicate worth of data entry. Excuse me. And then two, realize that this is 2020, that your operators are opening Facebook on their phone, that you're going on LinkedIn, or you're going on these other beautiful pieces of software. Anyone can literally open any browser virtually anywhere in the world and open Google. Like, design a solution that looks like it was designed in 2020. Don't design a solution that it looks like your second cousin twice removed designed it in his basement in 1995. Like, we should not be accepting 1995 solutions. Yes, I realize that that is the best that some people in the industrial space can do, because that's what they've always done. But it's 2020. Develop a solution that looks like it's made in 2020 so that you can use it for the next decade plus before you have to do a major overhaul. Don't develop something that looks like it's made in 1995 that you are literally hiring people who were born after that point in time, and they don't know how this thing works because they've never seen something that looks like this so terrible.
Yeah, that's great advice for sure. So to kind of close out that topic, I think that's sort of a great place to kind of wrap it up there. If any of you guys have any thoughts or ideas, we'd love to hear them from you. So don't hesitate to reach out to us and give us your feedback. But before we go, we thought, with everyone living the quarantine life, having a little bit more free time on your hands to consume some content and spend some time, we would give you guys a couple of recommendations on some stuff you could check out. So this might be a new thing that we do on the show from here to there. So I'll start, and then I'll pass it off to you, Dave. But I am a big podcast fan. I'm totally addicted to podcasts. I listen to an insane amount of podcasts every week. But I'm also a somewhat of a space nerd. I'm not like super into it, but I grew up as a kid, like really interested in space and NASA especially. So there was a podcast that came out a couple years ago called 13 Minutes to the Moon, and it's created by BBC World Service. And so the production value is really super high. and they started that first season going through the Apollo 11 mission. And the cool thing about it was they went and sourced all of the archival audio recordings from, Mission Command talking to the guys in the shuttle, in the spacecraft and back and forth. So you get this sort of like real life reenactment of what they're kind of going through in real time. So the Apollo 11 one they did a couple years ago was incredible, and I may or may not have cried when the final episode finished up. I'm going to leave that up for discussion, but they just started the second season, I guess about a month or so ago, and it's on Apollo 13. And they really sort of ratcheted it up to the next level. So they interviewed Jim Lovell and everybody that's on the crew and so many guys that worked at Mission Control. And it's really a great podcast. So open up your podcast app, search for 13 Minutes to the Moon, and I would start at the beginning. Listen to Apollo 11, try not to cry, but then definitely catch up on season 2 because they've done an absolutely fantastic job. So that's my recommendation for this week. Dave, what do you got?
I like it. I've heard of 13 Minutes to the Moon. I don't remember listening to it. I feel like I would have remembered listening to something that has that production quality. So yeah, I'm also going to go with a podcast, and maybe this section can be the weird podcast that Dave listens to. So I'm going to shout out a podcast that I've listened to that recently made it on Conan's podcast. As he meets people, they try to guess if this thing is real or not. It's called the Pen Addict Podcast. In which a couple of guys, Brad Dowdy, who lives not too far outside of Atlanta, Georgia, and this guy named Mike, who's British. His name is Myke. I laugh every time they say that. Literally talk about pens, which I like. There is a stack of pens behind me on the table, all sorts of pens and paper and writing implements. If you go back, 425-ish episodes, you can listen to that. You can listen to them start this journey, and it's been very interesting to see what they've done, and I'm sure most people would be absolutely horrified with the amount of money that they've spent on pens. It's one of those hobbies where it's best if you don't think about how much it costs.
Right. So okay, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Dave, because I know what a big fan you are of pens. But if you're a total pen noob, you've just been using the cheap big pens your whole life, and you're like, you know what, I want a taste of what this is like. Let's give them like a sort of entry level cheap pen that you would recommend someone start with.
Yeah. So my entry level cheap pen was probably the Pilot G2s. And that is something that you're going to find everywhere. And honestly, it's this is a nice pen. It's not those crappy Bic pens that my mom buys in, 500 pack. And so I used those for a while. And then I went to felt tip pens because I was looking for different variations of colors. And so I found felt tip pens. So the first pen that I actually bought it because it was a deal on Walmart, and I'm like, hey, I want to try fountain pen things. It was a Pilot Metropolitan. It's an entry level fountain pen. When I got it, I think I got it for like $9 or $10, and I'm like, hey, it's going to cost me $4 more than the shipping was going to cost. I can try this. And so no, that is kind of the beginning of my fountain pen collection. And there are a bunch of different fountain pens that you can buy at a bunch of various different retailers online. I won't shout them out because then it'll sound like an ad from the Pen Addict podcast. But no, a bunch of really good pens, pencils. You can fill your own cartridges with various different colors, and you can spend as little as, $10 to $20 on a pen. And there are some really weird, like Star Wars Game of Thrones pens that I don't think are supposed to actually be used that are in like the $20,000 to $60,000 price range. I think they're like collector's pieces.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's insane.
Well, like it doesn't look like it would be comfortable to write on, nor would you like want to take this $60,000 pen out to write on. But
yeah,
no.
That's cool. Yeah. So there's your reason to go check out the show notes for this show. We'll add some links in there for Dave's recommendation starting point if you're looking for a new pen addiction. Yes. For me personally, since high school, my pen of choice, and I'm in no way like a connoisseur of pens, but my favorite pen has always been the Pilot Precise V5. So it's a clicky pen, but it's rollerball. and it's a really nice pen. And also shout out to, so me and Dave have something in common here. One of our favorite notebooks is the Studio Neat Pano book.
Oh yeah.
It's a really, really nice notebook. You got yours handy there? I don't have mine.
I do. But, hold on.
Okay. But yeah, so the cool thing about the Pano book is instead of being like a 8.5 by 11, like typical size notebook, it's more of like a panoramic size. So it's sort of long and short, which is really nice. Yeah, that's cool. It's really nice because you can sit it beside your computer or in front, and it's the paper is really nice. So yeah, we'll add those links to the show. Y'all check out those podcasts, and I think that's it. You got anything else, Dave?
No, I think that sounds good. Let us know what you guys think about space and pens and Saas fatigue. And we've got a couple of ideas of what we're going to talk about next. But if you guys have recommendations, go ahead, share them, email them to us, or like whatever you're possibly still listening to this on.
All right. Y'all have a good one. We'll see you in a couple weeks.
Bye-bye.
See ya.